Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Security Boulevard panel on API security. I'm your host, Mike Vizard, and we have three outstanding experts today to have a chat about what's going on with all things related to APIs and security. But first, a couple of housekeeping notes. First, we will be giving away some gift certificates, so stay tuned to the end of the presentation to see who wins those. They are from Amazon. And then we will also be encouraging everybody to chat. So find that little chat button and by all means weigh in, and we will monitor that as we go along, and we'll include your questions in our conversation, and we try to make this whole thing feel a little more collegial. Our presentation today will come from the following three experts: Scott Gerlach, who is co-founder and chief security officer for Stackhawk, a provider of API security testing tools. Scott, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Our next presenter is Sharon Mantine, who is co-founder and CEO for Envision, a provider of a lifecycle management platform for APIs. Sharon, welcome.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
And then finally, we have Justin McCarthy, who is co-founder and CTO for StrongDM, a provider of an infrastructure access network. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hello.
All right, let's get started with Scott. APIs have been around for a long time, so the idea that there's a security issue may not necessarily be new, but we are seeing a lot more focus on this. So what is changing out there? Why is there more attention being paid to API security? Where is the stress coming from?
Yeah, with the stress, who knows where the stress comes from, but APIs they're driving the digital economy right now, right? So everybody that's out there is making APIs accessible, or they're building front-end frameworks that rely on APIs that necessarily need to be publicly accessible. So whether it's B2C or B2B or whatever it is, there's probably some kind of underlying API behind it. And that's where all the good stuff is. That's where all the data is, all the sensitive information or the things that you want to protect. And that's, I think, why attackers are starting to leverage attacks against those things, and B, people are raising their awareness into, I got to think about the API as well as the front-end web app or whatever that legacy version of it used to be.
All right.
Well, to that, I think that what we are seeing, in the industry in the last couple of months is an explosion in the number of APIs that the organization develops, and that's kind of like combines both the internal APIs, which demonstrate the one type of attack surface, while there are the external, as Scott mentioned, the B2B and the B2C that demonstrate another type of attack vector. So we do see a very broad variance of APIs that enable a wide range of new attack vectors in the industry.
Justin, are you seeing that as well? And are all APIs relatively equal from a security perspective, or are the internal ones more or less sensitive than the external ones?
Sure. I would say my take on APIs in general is that it's part of the trend of just more of everything. And it's more of stuff that you're building today, as well as it's more of stuff that you built 5 years ago as well. So really, you're bringing all of your applications along with you. Of course, our whole day is focusing on infrastructure access. So we're thinking about the authentication part, we're thinking about the authorization part, even the networking layer, and then the audit of the use of those APIs. And I would say, yeah, there's just more of everything of every type. That's what we're seeing at StrongDM for sure.
All right. Ron, let me come back to you for a minute. Who's in charge of these APIs? Theoretically, a developer builds them, but you guys are running this whole lifecycle platform. So who do you see taking charge of this? It seems like, to me at least, sometimes the developer writes the API and then forgets about it. Other times they think a security person's in charge. Is that changing, or is it just kind of falling in between all these players?
One of the key challenges with API, with securing API, is like one of the feedbacks that we hear a lot from our customers. It's like responsibility without authority. Security teams are the ones that are responsible to protect the APIs, like they're responsible to protect any other assets within the organization. But the APIs have been developed, controlled, managed by the development team, by the API admins, so on and so forth. So the number one challenge that we see in the industry today is how to provide the security team with the ability to control over the security of their APIs. It's not just about who manage them or who develop them, but how security teams can enforce control over those APIs. And this is exactly the idea of having or integrating security capabilities into the lifecycle management of the API to allow security teams to have checkpoints across the different stages of the APIs and being able to verify and validate that all those security measurements are being taken into account throughout the process in the development, in the testing, and in the production environment.
All right. Justin, let me ask you a follow-up on that. Because what Sharon is saying is essentially we should all get along and do our gig together and have some sort of collaborative approach to this thing. And yet, I don't think I see that happen very often. So is there a cultural disconnect between the developers and the security teams? And how do I kind of close that?
Sure. I would say that one of the most powerful truths of APIs, and this is their strength and their weakness, as is always the case, is that they're externally testable. Okay, so one way to bridge that divide is just to order up a normal pen test. They don't cost that much in the grand scheme of things. You can do them in a way that feels healthy, right? You can even declare a hack day for your own staff to attack the API for a day. That's a fun way to sort of get everybody involved as well. So I would just say one part of bridging that divide is bringing concrete examples instead of sort of a fog of suspicion and confusion. So I would say this concretely is a privilege escalation that is possible through this path. That's way easier to talk about than security in the abstract. So that'd be my advice. Just go ahead and test.
All right, Scott.
That's very good.
You're king.
I think if I can comment on that, this is a very good situation. But one thing that we have to bear in mind is that API attacks are targeted attacks. It means that if someone wants to attack your API, they need to learn them and find your specific vulnerabilities. And the vulnerabilities derive normally from software bugs, either in the implementation or the design, which means that every time that you change your API, potentially you add a new bug and a new vulnerability. And that's what makes it very difficult to do it in a manual way, like a pen testing, and kind of like force organization to automate those processes.
All right. Scott, what should we be testing for then? Because it seems like there's a lot of possibilities. And without doing a full boat product pitch, are there things that are called out most often or things that you see most frequently where there's an issue?
Yeah, totally. I also want to extend a little bit on what Justin was saying and Sharon was saying. How do security teams help developer teams? I think the advice I give to my security professionals is always go sit with the security team and just listen, or with the development team, and listen to what they're working on and the problems they're trying to face, and hear how you can help them instead of just flying in with a Superman cape on and being like, hey, I'm here to help you with things you don't know that are problems. So that's one thing. I think that early testing often is super important. And so what should we be testing? As much stuff as you can. Like we're talking about security testing. We're already doing unit testing and functional testing and integration testing. Security testing should just be part of that suite. It should be an automated thing that gives you information about whether or not you are making security mistakes. The OWASP, somebody asked a good question in Q&A. The OWASP API Security Top 10 guide is a really good place to start, especially in REST API. It's not comprehensive. It's not the end of the list. When you get to 10, it's not done. But more and more things that you can do to automate that security testing in a similar fashion to how software is tested today and deployed makes it better and better and better. And it builds a collaborative workspace so that security and I hate to say there shouldn't be checkpoints and there shouldn't be roadblocks, but there should be collaborative information in there to be able to go, I know I'm not making serious security mistakes going to production deploy here, or I don't know what this thing is. I need to go grab my security team so I can help understand what this thing is and how fast we should prioritize it, fix it. Just to make that culture of like, it's a continuous deployment, continuous development process, very adherent to how security is involved and participates in that process as well.
All right, I'm going to quote Ronald Reagan here, who once said that the 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. So the corollary of that in IT is now, I'm here from security and I'm here to help. How does the security person approach that development team in a way that the development team will welcome or understand or see or appreciate? I don't know. Justin, you got any advice there?
Yeah, sure. So I would say spend a little time trying to fit in. So learn the tool chain, learn the ticketing tool chain, learn how to submit a topic in a language, and maybe even targeting a layer of the application, like as in this line of code. Please consider this in this line of code. I think that's a great way to spend some time just to try and speak the same language. So that'd be my first advice. And then being that, then you can be that liaison from maybe a bug bounty program or something else. And when those events do come around, you're there, you already speak the language, and your ability to interact with an external researcher can be appreciated by the team, right? And just be that support around a security topic.
All right, Sharon, you want to add to that? My advice would be to, buy pizza and donuts, but I don't really know, but,
And my advice would be prioritize. And that's part of the automation process. One of the most valuable things that we see when we export insights for vulnerabilities, either from production or for testing, back to the development tools, you have to prioritize. You have to be very clear what is the potential impact. There is a very broad range of risks, and not all of them are at the same level, obviously. So the ability to pinpoint on what are the most risky things. For example, when we talk the API security language, I think everyone agrees that BOLA, broken up with level authorization, would be far more risky compared to, for example, other things down the list. But we know that as security experts, development teams do not understand the difference between BOLA and logging. So those things needs to be very clear, that when you have Ebola, you're risking on data theft, and that could have a dramatic impact on the organization. So that's my advice here.
Scott, we hear a lot about shifting left, DevSecops. Are developers going to learn more about security, or is that kind of wishful thinking maybe, and they're too busy and they got too much going on and we need another approach?
I think they want to. I don't think so. Sharon just made a great example here. We're talking about BOLA, broken object level authorization or access, or whatever you want to call it. No one knows what that means outside of application security professionals, because we just invented the word. However, if you say tenancy filtering to most developers, they understand exactly what you're talking about. And those are the same thing. So we have this tendency to talk about things in a security kind of state of mind that doesn't make sense to a lot of developers. And I think that like turns them off from learning, like, oh man, I got to learn this whole other job. I don't really want to do that. But the developers I've talked to and we've talked to are really interested in being able to know about mistakes that they're potentially making and being able to fix them. It's just, we have to make the barrier to entry of knowledge much, much lower. Like, we go around going, hey, we got to teach you about information security. And so many information security professionals or application security professionals don't know how to code. So it's really disingenuous for us to go, hey, you should be able to know my job, but I don't need to know how to do your job because reasons. Where, I think the time is coming when if you don't know how to write some code or understand code, your security job is going to get quickly obsoleted. So I think developers want to know about this stuff, which the level of effort they have to put into it needs to come down.
Right. Justin, do security people need to learn how to code, or can we give them visual graphical tools that allow them to do their job and automate things, or would they be better off if they just knew how to code? Or maybe we take developers and turn them into security people. I don't know.
Sure, I'm still waiting for all my bets from the '80s on visual graphical explanations to pay off. So I guess when those pay off, then I'll let you know. But in the meantime, yeah, there's kind of no substitute for being able to read some text in a couple different languages. So I don't know. It can't really hurt. The other thing I'll say is that the change stream on an application is expressed in terms of changes in text, and so being able to read a series of commits and have some notion approximately what topics are in play. Yeah, I think that just can't hurt. And to amplify Scott's point, that sounds like an enduring skill set that's gonna last for a couple decades still.
All right, Sharon, let me come to you on this one. We hear that we want security people to learn how to code, but when I look at developers and their use of infrastructure as code tools and their ability to provision, say, APIs in the cloud, I would hazard to guess there are a lot of misconfigurations out there. So, what is the upside here of infrastructure as code with all these different APIs if we're going to have all these misconfigurations? Is there some way to kind of rein that in?
So first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that developers are measured by number of features they produce, and security people are measured by the ability to protect the service, to protect the organization. So I fully agree with Scott that you may encounter some some developers that already have the ambitious and they understand that it's important and they read the news and they wanna be more security oriented. But at the end of the day, when there is a collision, they will be measured based on meeting their deadlines, delivering features to customers, and there will be less about the security quality of the code. So by the end of the day, within an organization, you have roles and responsibilities. It is the responsibility of the security team to protect that. Now, the only question is how to provide security personnel with the ability to control that. And again, going back to your question about misconfigurations, one of the major challenges, because you can test things in the pre-prod and staging environment and all goes well, but someone just on the production environment just forgot to define something, and then you have an internal API that is being exposed to the outside world. So all those kind of things must be validated and reevaluated on a continuous basis by the security team. This is what should keep them up at night. The developer has other challenges to deal with. And this is the challenge that we see with all the concept of DevSecops. At the end of the day, people are, when there is a constraint, people are operating based on their KPIs.
Justin, do you agree with that? Is there something that can be done about misconfigurations, or is this just another instance where you have to do the work?
Sure. So here's what I'll say. It can't make the problem worse to have a single commit in a code repository in either a declarative or imperative configuration language that you can trace that you can approve, that you can test, and then promote in an automated fashion. So if you build some of that infrastructure, it can't hurt. You can still make mistakes, but when you make the mistake, you can locate it, and then you can root cause it, and then you can prevent it from coming back in the future. So I would absolutely still want to employ some runtime monitoring, right? Absolutely, sort of outside in runtime monitoring, outside in sort of inspection of the, for example, the public cloud configuration that's in use. But man, when you're expressing what changes we want to deploy today, doing that in terms of clicks as opposed to just one button push, why subject yourself to human error when you can automate?
All right. Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
We've been telling developers to test more frequently for years with mixed success. What makes you guys think that maybe API testing will be a different case? Will developers warm to that more so than others, or is the testing always going to be left in the hands of the security people to figure it out?
I think if you think about testing as a whole, I think you're talking about unit tests and integration tests. There's a lot of that going on. There's a culture of quality that's being built in a lot of engineering organizations. Again, the barrier to entry on security testing is generally really high, and automation against all that stuff. Writing negative unit tests sucks. Writing negative integration tests sucks. Like, it shouldn't ever do this if I put in 1,400 iterations of SQL injection or cross-site scripting or whatever. Writing that manually is terrible. So there's lots of great tools out there that can actually help you automate that negative use case testing so that you can do the positive use case testing, and have a comprehensive suite of tests that are run locally in CI/CD before you deploy to staging, before you deploy to production. Is it the end all be all? No. The unit testing, integration testing, security testing isn't the perfect solution for everything. It doesn't get you to the ultimate safety. The ultimate safety in application development is deleted. Then it's unbreakable at that point. But having those really good culture of testing and being more and more integrated in that testing culture is really, really important and super good for application security health.
Sharon, how automated do you think things can get? Do we ever going to see a time where it's just full life cycle, and not only am I discovering that there's an issue with the API security, but that it's going to be automatically remediated in some magical, mythical way?
I think there is a long way to go before things will be automatically remediated, but there is a lot of things that can be done today to automate processes. First of all, we have to understand, again, I said it before and I said it again, API is a very proprietary environment. So if you want to protect your API production, if you want to test your API, you first of all need to learn their context. You need to understand your APIs and definitely not by manually configure their expected behavior. That's never going to work. The API has such a broad variance of behaviors that it's not really possible to even think about doing it manually. So automation starts with learning. The ability to learn the functional behavior of the APIs and automatically generate models that will protect and validate this behavior in production, and at the same time use the same models to automatically generate manipulated API calls that violates these the behaviors we learned and test them against the service. That will give you the reactive and proactive combination of reactive and proactive approach that will allow to provide a fully automated process to scratch the surface and expose those vulnerabilities. Once you have exposed them, then comes the second part of the automation: how to push them into the right audience within the right set of tools that they normally use. No one will be able to get, from the development team, will be able to get the feedback that comes from the same system. You have to expose that through the tools that they work with, whether it is Slack or Jira or any other third-party tools that the organization use within their R&D organization. And then comes the manual part, which is fixing the bug. Eventually, someone needs to fix the bug, and that still happens manually. So, but at least until this point, everything can be fully automated.
All right. Hey, Justin, I want to come back to something you were talking about earlier. There are a lot of APIs. There's more of them than ever, and we now have GraphQL alongside REST and SOAP and all this stuff from Amazon or whatever it can be. Are any of these APIs, from your perspective, more secure than another, or are they all just equally insecure?
Sure. So I think this is a probably a common lament on a lot of teams. If we only had technology X, we would be in a different situation. If we only weren't using PHP, or if we only were using PHP, I think there's enough evidence out there that you can achieve a secure result in most languages, in most technology stacks, and so it's more of a question of how is your product layered. So I'll use the example, since you highlighted it, of GraphQL versus REST versus, actually in our case, gRPC. So one thing that we have been very clear about in our code base is there's one path for everything, right? So if you're saying something in REST versus if you're saying the same thing in GraphQL or in gRPC, it's all going to flow through the same code path. And actually, the assertions about the authorization and the authentication are going to be identical. That's a hard thing to achieve. You have to have very clean code. You have to work on it for a long time, but it is very possible. So I think just having the hope that you can get there, hope is essential throughout all of these pursuits, for sure.
All right, Scott, do you agree with that, or you guys test a lot of these APIs? So are any of them more secure than the others, or we just gotta have to go by each use case?
Yeah, I don't think more secure is a thing. The ability to make less mistakes, maybe a thing. I don't know. It just depends on what you're building and how you're building it, right? A REST API endpoint can be as vulnerable or more vulnerable or less vulnerable than a GraphQL API endpoint. It depends on what you're doing and how well versed you are in that technology, or your development team is in that technology. And the corollary is, when you're starting in a new technology, you make more mistakes. Strangely, if you're well versed in REST API and you guys are like, we should do GraphQL, you're probably going to make more mistakes in the GraphQL land than you did in REST API land. But those mistakes may potentially be worth it at the same time. So that's where that continuous testing might come in. I also wanted to really quick comment on, is there a day when it can all be automated? Maybe. Like, if you look at what's going on with GitHub Copilot and some of the tools that they have, quickly getting to the point where I've identified a problem, I know what line of code to fix, and maybe machine language can tell me how to fix it and or possibly do it for me. That's kind of crazy. And I think it could be really, really cool. Like, whatever you think about Copilot, right? Like, it's doing the whole, I'm doing machine learning on potentially vulnerable language in the first place. Okay, sure, but it's new. So the idea that it could get to the point where it's like, here's the line of code you had to fix. PS, I already did it for you. Here's the pull request to fix all this stuff. That sounds really awesome.
All right. Hey, Sharon, what do you think? Is AI going to save us from ourselves? Come on. I mean, Skynet's coming. It's going to solve all these issues.
First of all, I fully agree with Scott that we should always, stick to the hub. But my view on that AI is a great technology for a very specific set of use cases. One of the great things that we like by using AI and machine learning on APIs is the fact that if you think about API is a deterministic environment. Eventually, it is a dialogue between two applications that each one has its own specification. So it means that it is deterministic. Yet, it has a very broad variance of behaviors. So we are talking about a very complex environment with a deterministic characteristics. And that's what makes it perfect for tools and from the AI and machine learning. I think that is the number one enabler for the automation.
Justin, do you believe in AI, or what? Are you more skeptical?
You may be asking the wrong person on this question, because or let's say I'm also still waiting on a lot of use cases. So I love AI for a bunch of use cases that we're all using every day. How about that? So I love natural language. I love the image classification. All that stuff seems great. Still waiting for something that can learn the contours of a business model and understand the degrees of freedom in an API, and be able to understand what gestures make sense and what gestures don't make sense. Still waiting on that.
So that's right next to those graphical tools that you're waiting on too, right?
Yeah, same category. Very long bets. Yep.
All right. Scott, let me ask you something. There is a lot more focus these days on software supply chains. It's a big topic. We've had the Biden administration come out and link some arms with some folks last week and do a little kumbaya, saying that this is all going to be a matter of focus. Do you think that particular area of investment is going to trickle down more to API security? Will there be more of an understanding of the API's role in the software supply chain, or what do you think the outcome might be?
Boy, that's a loaded question. First of all, I'm here from the government. I'm here to help again. But so there's some good stuff that's happening there, and the focus on supply chain security, I think, started with the SolarWinds stuff, like a lot of attention on the SolarWinds stuff. And it's really hard to go, we should do something to prevent a SolarWinds type of attack, because it's way more nuanced and sophisticated when a nation state threat actor is trying to breach your network than it is like some people have found my API online and they're going to try testing against it. So, the supply chain stuff I think is really cool. I think the interesting thing about supply chain is, I saw a recent study that said like 70% of the vulnerabilities that are in code that you're deploying is in code that you've written, not that you've included in libraries. So 30% is in that open source kind of library type code. The rest of it's in code you wrote. So while it's good to focus on supply chain and all those good things, the things that you write as well, the words that your development team write as well, are equally as important, if not maybe more important. There's less open source eyes focusing on that and getting feedback into the projects than there is in kind of the open source land. So it's a strong question.
If I could respond to Scott's point there, one change in supply chain that we've absolutely noticed is the imperative to treat your build systems very similar to your production systems in terms of their infrastructure security. So who can log into a builder? The answer to that 5 years ago was everybody. And the answer to that next year is hopefully a very deliberate list of people. So treating your builders, treating even your test environments like your production environment is a change that we've been a part of for sure with a number of customers.
Sharon, are you seeing organizations become a little more mature and sophisticated in the way they approach this whole software supply chain and API security, or are you still, maybe we're a little dubious that that's going to happen because it's process and it seems like that takes a long time for people to wrap their heads around?
I think that the level of awareness for everything that relates to API attacks, API vulnerabilities, increased drastically in the last 18 months. I think that I think the inflection point was around Q4 2019 when OWASP published a dedicated top 10 for API and kind of like put a very clear statement on the table that API is not just another web interface, and it has different challenges compared to what we used to do in the classical web application world. So that was one thing, and I think that was followed by a lot of kind of like coverage from different research groups. Gartner is doing a great job on that, Forrester and others. So the awareness is there, and organizations are getting more and more concerned about their APIs, and some of them are already taking concrete actions by building processes. Now, the biggest challenge that they face, like any enablement of a process, is how to control the process, how to enable that process. Everything in security is about the triangle between technology, process, and people. But in API, it's much more complicated than that. And the reason is that if you look at network security, for example, as a security team, you have a full control on identifying the problem and remediating the problem. In an API, that's not the case. You have the ability, if you use the right tools, you have the ability to identify the problem, but eventually the bug that caused the vulnerability will have to be fixed by the R&D team. And that what creates the challenge of enabling the process. What we see today is actually the ability or the lack of ability in some of the organizations to be able to validate and control those processes. Yeah, I want to make sure that everyone in my organization do a static API security testing for the Swagger before they push them into the API management for publication. But how can I control that? How can I verify that there is no direct link between the export of the developer all the way down to the API management catalog? Those kind of things are the one that that organization needs today in order to control processes.
All right. Hey, Justin, one man's penetration testing is another man's reconnaissance mission. So how do I know when people are poking at my APIs? Is there some way to kind of get a sense of if somebody is maybe getting ready to attack me before they attack me? Is there something I can do there?
Yeah, so if that's a topic of concern and you're looking to sort of profile and identify usage that indicates somebody's exploring something, I think that's pretty tractable, because your real customers and your real users are going to have a very consistent look to them in terms of the frequency distribution of endpoints they access and so on. My question is then what you do with that and how you roll that into a program overall that embraces researchers, bug bounties, and then possibly identifies true people that you're more suspicious of. So I don't have any great advice on how to particularly formulate that database, but I will say for sure that yeah, you should be able to do some pretty good stuff. One note is for all of our APIs, I think the official client, the official libraries are sort of the most common ways to call the APIs. So those official libraries are all going to transmit a very consistent set of strings on who they are and who wrote them and what version they're at. And so even something obviously that's easy to synthetically transmit as well, but even something like that is going to indicate whether this is a probable real use or probable not. A lot of it depends on your domain as well.
All right, Scott, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I would ask you, are they, we hear the phrase zombie APIs. People write APIs and they forget about them, and then people are somehow or other not defending those things, and the next thing you know, data goes out the door. How big an issue do you think that really is? It's a great phrase, but is it prevalent, or is it maybe some unique use case that doesn't happen all that much?
Yeah, fair enough. I do want to add to the last one. We're getting a pen test on our service today, and guess what? Error code started popping up and sending us alerts to the engineering team. 400 type errors, 401s, 403s. So there are ways to kind of see some of that, detect some of that anomalous activity, whether or not it's pen testers or broken service, 400s, 500s, those kinds of error codes that are likely already being trapped are good indicators. Zombie APIs, man, if there was never a piece of code that people let languish or got deprecated and the business or organization decided to stop supporting it and stop putting money in, oh, by the way, it's still making us money, so it's going to stay there, but no one's going to work on it. Those are things that happen in almost every business. As far as like how do you protect those things or how do you find those things, I think if you know about them earlier, it kind of comes down to asset management at that point, where if you know about them early, what the code base is, who's working on it, where is it getting deployed, how does it work, then it's easier for those things to not go missing later down the road. As far as discovery, I mean, there's some good tools out there that can help you do discovery on assets that you may or may not know about that are in your asset library, APIs or web apps or servers sitting out there that can help you with that kind of coverage. But the earlier you get involved with that development team, the more knowledge you'll have down the road when it suddenly gets abandoned because of other priorities or whatever.
All right. Sharon, do you think this is part of a bigger issue with the supply chain and the whole life cycle management? Because it does seem to me there are more projects being launched around so-called digital business transformation initiatives, and there's a lot of technical debt floating around the organization. So do you think maybe the simplest thing people might want to do is just do an API audit to see what they got?
Well, that thing goes back to the point that Scott made just before about doing an API discovery. I think the number one question that we always ask prospects is, how many APIs do you have? No one knows. No, seriously, that's a typical answer. We don't know. And like anything in security, what you cannot see, you cannot protect. So it has to start with this good discovery. And then also when we talk about discovery, there are many ways of doing discovery. The only question that every organization need to ask themselves is, where is the right way to discover the APIs? Because if you try to discover them on the gateway, you will have a great result. You will come out with an understanding that you know all of your APIs because you define them on the gateway. But that's not a right way to validate it. You have to search for them on the networking, where all the sneaky API or the rogue APIs, which do not go through the gateway, will be identified. And then there is a second question of, is it suffice just to do a passive discovery? I just want to listen to the traffic and see, okay, which APIs are being approached and which respond. Some would say yes. I would say no, because the silent APIs, the one that will hit you the most, will not be able to be discovered unless someone will actively scan for them and identify them. And there's many other questions like this that each and every organization need to go through that thought process to understand how much they want to put into that. And I think if there is one thing that you want to invest the most to start with, is with your discovery.
All right. Hey, Justin, I guess, what I took out of that is maybe we need a bring out your dead API day, and maybe, we'll offer people a bounty for finding these APIs that no one's using. I mean, are there practical ways to go after that people can implement and say, here's how we're actually going to go discover those APIs, or do that in a way that people will get behind?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think this is related to the concept of legacy in general, and I think so. I would just point out it's true that a lot of these legacies or zombies may be out there because somebody believes they're still making money. I would actually point out that it's kind of essential to ask that. So this is outside the security team, outside the software engineering team. This is at product management or general management. Can we kill this thing off? If that question isn't being asked at the highest level in the organization, and if the math isn't being done with opportunity cost as the measure, then you might have a bad time because you might need to hold on to these zombies for longer than a rational analysis would suggest you should. So I would say start there. Can we delete this thing? And maybe that's the invitation. You can bring out your legacy API because we're trying to help you kill it. So that's the incentive.
All right, Scott, let me ask you this: are the bad guys going after APIs more because we're getting better at other aspects of security, and with all due respect to cyber criminals everywhere, they're generally lazy people. APIs are a little more challenging to go after. So, or is it just that part of this issue is we're getting better at security elsewhere, so now they're moving over to APIs because that's the next easy thing to get?
Yeah, I think first of all, you made me envision Monty Python sketch with a cart of dead APIs on it. That's pretty good. But I think as we move to this more cloud-based infrastructure, yes, it is possible to make mistakes, but those cloud-based infrastructures kind of set you up for security by default and help you with your infrastructure security and compute security and bucket security. Like, yes, you can still make mistakes, but it's a lot harder and it takes less time to get that infrastructure to a really good spot. I think the last barrier there, well, maybe there's two last barriers. Maybe one, it's people. That's the easy version of going to exploit something. But the other one is the application. And so I also like to think that attackers or threat actors are in the opportunity cost bucket as well. So the easier it is to make an attack successful, the more they have to gain out of it, as opposed to spending a lot of time with a lot of research, a lot of digging into how a threat or an attack might work. But applications are kind of that last-ish barrier, right? They're the things that we as security teams haven't gotten good grasp or integration on because we're not good friends with the development team. We made decent friends with the network and operations teams, like, hey, you guys are running the firewalls, we want to be involved, we're buddies and we're hand in hand. We haven't done that necessarily with the development teams around our organizations, and that's why that's kind of languishing. And so making those connections and working together as part of a team in an organization is super important. But I think that's why applications are getting a lot of focus from threat actors, is sort of kind of the last thing that hasn't gotten good security integration yet.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to play a little game. I call it the King for a Day game. You are going to be anointed king of API security for a day. You could do anything you wanted for one day. What would you tell the world to do, or what would you order up? Sharon, let's start with you.
I think I've said that in my previous answer. If you have one day, invest in discovery.
All right. Scott, what do you want to say?
Boy, you guys have a weird idea of how kings work. I might just go spend the day at Versailles and like API security. I don't know what that is all about. I'm over here at Versailles. For real's answer, I think about really good testing frameworks that integrate well with how developers work. That would be my starting place.
All right, Justin, any thoughts as king for the day? What would you do? What would your
Yeah, I'm gonna say there's nothing like acting like a red team. So I would say mandatory red team time for anyone building APIs. You have to red team your own or someone else's for 20% of your time.
All right. Well, let's just follow up on that. Scott, do you think there are enough red teams out there, or is everybody just kind of walking through their defenses, but they don't really put them to the test in the first place? So, are there not enough people with the expertise to be on a red team for that matter?
Yeah, I think so. In my history, I've worked at a place that had really good unemployed red teams, or not employed by the company red teams. So GoDaddy got attacked very, very regularly. So we are putting our blue team skills at the test all the time. SendGrid was a little bit different, where there was not as much of that kind of attack against infrastructure. It was more attack against service. So understanding the threat landscape is really critical to how you deploy a red team kind of a service, or how you deploy those detective defensive strategies. I think there's not a whole ton of red team skilled people out there outside of, on the good side. How's that? There's lots of them out there on the bad side. But I don't know, like it depends on the threat landscape for the company, if you can even make use of a red team at that point.
All right. We also have a lot of folks who are security professionals who are listening, and they always come up against the same issue. It's hard to get the organization to prioritize security. they're always telling them they want to write code faster. Security gets in the way. Are we writing code too quickly is the first question, or B, is there some way to continue to write code quickly and not sacrifice security? Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, so my hack on this conundrum is to stop having a conversation at the engineer at the desk, and I would have the discussion with the product manager, the person who is specifying the product, and then you can give them this really awesome use cases. Like, I should be able to, as an attacker, I should be able to see everything in the system and steal your data, and then they can weigh that against a revenue earning feature. They can, and to Scott's point earlier, it is difficult to write a negative use case, which is often how these things have to be phrased. But you can probably get your product manager thinking pretty clearly about like the cost of a tenancy filter violation. They can really intuitively feel that, and if they're feeling that, then yeah, they are going to be able to prioritize it against some potential revenue feature that they're scheduling for next week.
Sharon, are we too fast for our own good? Do we need to slow down, or is there some other way to think about this?
I think to find a common ground between developers and security, you have to kind of like align everyone on the same context, like threat modeling. Threat modeling is a mechanism that helps to bridge the gap between security and developers and make people understand and prioritize based on a common denominator that everyone understands. So as we said at the beginning, like if you say anything about Bola, okay, some security people will understand it, developer won't. But if you say something about data leakage and the impact or the implication of that, and put that as part of your threat modeling, that will make it very easy to understand. So when the time comes to really make a tough decision between revenue generating features versus resolving security vulnerabilities, it will be much more doable to compare and take a decision at the organization level. Not a pure play security game. It requires cooperation.
All right. Scott, many, many years ago, Ralph Nader wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. Kind of was a damning indictment of the automobile industry. Do you think that we're in danger of having that happen in the software industry, where people will say we're writing code and it's unsafe at any speed and we need to rethink this? Is there a crisis on the horizon?
I don't know if there's a crisis on the horizon. For me, writing software too fast, it doesn't really seem like a thing. Being too slow to come along as a security team, that's a thing. And I think a super underdeveloped skill in this arena is talking like product managers or business owners talking about the metrics that they care about. So product owner is probably working on time to value type things, or customer acquisition cost, or customer retention, or lots of different things that affect how the business operates. If you start understanding those metrics and talking about those metrics with a product manager or a product owner or at the executive type level, saying, look, if we have a breach, it's going to increase the cost. There's a potential to increase the cost of customer acquisition by 1% or 0.5%, or, it's going to increase the customer acquisition payback period by 3 months or 4 months. Like, talking in the language that the business talks about is super important, because it is more relevant to how they're thinking about the business versus, the stats about cost per record or other things that you try to round up about breaches that happen elsewhere and how does that apply to us. It's really hard to do because it doesn't have the same context. But if you start talking about threat modeling and how it affects those business numbers and how you're operating the business, it becomes a much more effective and intellectual conversation. And I think you then start going a little faster as a security team with the product development team to be able to say, hey, I know you're trying to affect this one number over here. if we don't do this, there's a potential that that number drops. And then they start thinking about it in the context of how they're getting paid and measured on their performance as well. So I think that's a super underdeveloped skill, and it will help security teams go faster, is to understand what things are happening there.
All right. I think you said compensation drives behavior, and it does so in the land of product development and security as much as anywhere else. Gentlemen, we have given a lot of advice. I want you guys to sit back for 1 minute and pick the one thing that you would want our attendees to walk away with here that's actionable for them to do starting tomorrow. Justin, let's start with you.
One thing, I think that just to not be overwhelmed. This is just it's always true for these topics, because it always seems like, and this is true for every environment that we're in. There's never enough time or money, and yet still we can improve. So I would just say don't be overwhelmed. Get as close to the root of the problem as you can, to reinforce Scott's point. Find the language that's in terms of your customers in your environment. Maybe you find that it's actually not a huge risk, a particular thing you might have been concerned about otherwise, and you help make that trade-off. Everyone's going to feel better when you make that trade-off, and you say, you know what, this API is very low risk. Let's focus our attention elsewhere. And you do that by accessing those higher level trade-offs in the business.
All right, Sharon, you told us to focus on discovery. So I'm going to ask you, what's your second biggest thing to do after discovery?
So when you do discovery, the next thing that comes with it is prioritization. At the end of the day, once you do discovery, it allows you to flag which NPIs or which endpoints within your APIs are the one that expose or impose the highest risk for the service or the organization. Focus on them. Being able to prioritize is the number one requirement for any activity that you want to go. Maybe at the end of the day, a year from now, you would like to do a full scanning of all your APIs. That's great. But at least start with the ones that pose the highest risk.
All right. And Scott, take us home.
Yeah, you bet. My one thing is relationship building. There's a lot of stuff in security that we can do kind of in isolation, in our own little dark corner, whether it's scanning assets or doing network vulnerability scanners or log collection. Excuse me. Application security is not one of those things. API security is not one of those things. You have to have really good collaboration and relationships with development teams. So the thing that I always say is go find a development team and sit in their scrums and planning and stand-ups and all that stuff, and just participate as part of their team for a month. Build a relationship with that team, build a good relationship, and then they'll start advocating for you around the rest of the organization. But it's all about, especially in this particular security segment, it's all about relationships. So flex your relationship skills and go build healthy, good relationships with your engineering teams.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. Our winners for the Amazon gift cards are Martha M., Jane C., Jose C., and Alexandra O. Congratulations to our winner. Everybody, be safe out there. Be safe in your APIs. Be safe in your lives. And by all means, we wish you all the continued success in the world. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.